about food and hospitality and home. It's based on this book, which you can see we have copies of for anybody who would like them, 20 bucks each, cash or check. And we want most of all to make sure we have enough food for everyone who comes. And therefore, we would love you to sign up now and let us know if you'll be there next Sunday for a hot and nourishing breakfast and also nourishment in the Word in the Gospel of Luke. So there's a sign-up sheet here. I'm going to sit next to Ezra. And with that, let me just introduce my friend and our fellow parishioner, Jim Zingarelli, who is a gifted sculptor, painter, printmaker too? Draftsman, and teacher. And so I'm eager to hear him this morning. Thank you so much, Jim, for your thoughts on art and devotion and the ways in which God has been leading you through your work. And Ezra, I think you are on, right? Great. Thank you, Jim.
Sure. Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. Thank you all for being here this morning. Art, faith, and devotion, not necessarily in that order, and you're probably wondering why not put them in the order they're supposed to be in. So artists don't always choose things based on hierarchies. They choose things based on the way they look and sound together. It's on, yeah. We're good? Okay. So the way that things sound in relationship to one another, the way things appear in relationship to one another. So if I were to create a law firm, and it would be based on 3 of our priests, I would probably call it Russell, Borgman, and Gray. That would be the name of the law firm. So and why would I choose it that way? So again, there's no hierarchy. It is not because we're trying to humble our rector, Father Gray, in the midst of that. It all has to do with the sound. I like the 2-syllable, 2-syllable, 1-syllable. That seems to sound better, right? Russell, Borgman, and Gray. So in this case, art, faith, and devotion. So I go with the single syllables, art, faith, and devotion. And then devotion kind of like leads off. It's got a little mystery, as it kind of trails off in that way. Now I could have called it faith, art, and devotion, but that would have been fad. And this is anything but that, over here. So that's the reason it's called what it is. What I'll do is I'll start with I'm going to start doing a little bit of reading just to kind of give some clarification, some definition, some hooks to hang our hats on, and then I'll stop reading and just go through it. You'll be seeing some images that will be quite well known, and I'm sure you will recognize them, and other images which I would bet you have never ever seen. In fact, until this past fall, when we were in Italy, there were some of these images I had never seen. It's also going from a lot of high and low art, both and in regards to art, faith, and devotion. So with that as an intro. Oh, and the last thing I want to say, it'll be a trip through Italy, So once again, some places where you've probably been if you have traveled to Italy, and some places I would bet you've not traveled to. So there you go. There is my pre-introduction as we go into some definitions. Can everybody hear me okay? Mm-hmm. All right. So there we go. And everybody can see the screen all right there? Kind of. I'll be reading, so hopefully that will look clear as I read. It was nothing short of an epiphany when I first learned that faith was not simply an acceptance, an assertion to an abstract theological principle. I cannot name the book where I'd read that in Hebrew, faith is not an idea, but an action. To have faith means that one lives in a particular manner with a sense that God is always present, that I am loved by him, and that there are neighbors of all sorts, also loved by God, that call for my attention and love. So there's a basic construct for faith. Faith as an action, not simply an assertion. Faith becomes a kind of spiritual breathing. My life is sustained in this act while I don't think about it too much. I'm more caught up in the wonder of being alive in the light of this day and grateful that I am given another opportunity to open my eyes and ears to all this day can bring, and to open my hands to offer something back to God in how I might give to the other, and with grace receive back. That's the idea anyway. Devotion for me is an expression of faith back to God, but it may also be directed to Mary, the mother of Jesus, or any number of saints whom we perhaps believe act as intercessors. I remember one Episcopal priest posing the rhetorical question, if we asked our parents to pray for us when they were physically alive, and if we believe they are indeed still eternally alive, why can't we ask them to still pray for us? I've never forgotten that, and I do confess that there are times, usually when I'm a bit more desperate, when I'm once again asking for their prayers. An act of devotion most often involves some sort of object or image that acts as a kind of portal or icon that has no mystical powers of its own, but helps us to center our thoughts and prayers, bringing us into an eternal focus. During COVID, when we could not meet, as we do here today, we depended on the kindness and generosity of people like Mother Susan and Patty and Robert Handlin and other vestry members to deliver the host to our homes so that we might all participate in Eucharist. Father Patrick suggested that we keep the host in some special place, and in doing this, we were making an act of devotion. We have a ceramic biscotti bowl given to us by our Italian family, and this became our ciborium. And over it, we placed an icon of Jesus, also given to us by our family. Each Sunday, when we had Eucharist, I would remove the icon, kiss the image of Jesus, and then remove the host from the jar. Again, neither the image nor the jar had mystical powers, but they were objects that directed our faith in devotion to our Lord and his sacrifice for us. I should also mention that the biscotti bowl and icon are placed in front of the liquor cabinet, so in the house. So it also became a little bit of a warning, maybe not too much over here, so it was appropriately placed in that way. Art has certainly played a major devotional role, not only within the Christian church, but other faith traditions as well. Within Christianity, there are many well-known Madonna and child images, crucifixions, pietas, and Last Suppers, to name just a few genres. This morning, I'd like to look at some well-known, but also some obscure examples that I've happened to see in the past year, especially during our time in Italy this past fall. These are two paintings by the Italian Baroque painter Caravaggio. You're probably familiar with Caravaggio's work in some ways. And both of these paintings are from 1601 and rather unusual compositions, which was not unusual for Caravaggio. Quite a character, in fact, if you read anything about his life. If we see the crucifixion of Peter on the left-hand side, we see that all the crucifiers take up as much space as the Apostle Peter himself. In fact, they are positioned in some rather awkward positions, including the butt side of one of the crucifiers pushing the cross up underneath his back. If we look at the the conversion of St. Paul, called the conversion on the way to Damascus. There is Paul sprawled on the ground, but the horse takes up at least 2/3 of the painting. And once again, it's not the better side of the horse that's facing outward. Once again, the key here is that Caravaggio, the main actor here, is not the horse, not the crucifier, not Paul or Peter, but the main actor is the light. The main actor is what is revealing the truth in the midst of that, which is again a major Baroque example. That light is a metaphor for truth. Light here is a metaphor for God. Are these devotional paintings? Let's look at them in context. So, if we look at these two images in Santa Maria della Popola, which is a church in Rome, where both paintings are displayed, in which I was there with my colleagues and students while I was teaching in Orvieto. We made the trip to Rome, and I got to see both of these paintings for the first time, in the paint, in real life, and in context. And when we look at these paintings in the church, that image is probably difficult to see for you right now. There's a beanie-clad fellow who's looking up at the very bottom. That happens to be me. My buddy Matt took that picture of me, and I'm looking up at the conversion on the way to Damascus. Now, if you look over here, you can see you can kind of see the crucifier that we saw in the last painting. So you can see the size of these pieces. The other thing to take note of is the fact that the paintings feel embedded into the walls of the chapel. They're very much intentionally, contextually placed there in that way. In that way, making them images not necessarily for museums, but fit for a place of contemplation and devotion. Context means everything to these pieces. In the Duomo in Orvieto, which is just a magnificent Italian Gothic church, and in the Duomo there are all different kinds of frescoes, and some others that we'll look at in a moment. Around the main chapel, and I took both of these images over here. So the church is dedicated to Mary, and so consequently there's a lot of images of Mary and from Mary's life, Mary's ascension, coronation as well, and it's the apse. So it's like as you walk down the main nave of the church. So this is where the main altar is. That's the apse in the back of the church, including a wonderful set of stained glass that are back there. 1370, when these particular frescoes were painted. And one of the things to take note of is, once again, this idea of devotion, and devotion to whom? Devotion to Mary, the mother of Christ. In fact, the entire church, built over centuries, is dedicated to Mary, the mother of Christ. Now, I know we all represent various theological points of view, so I'm not here to push any one particular point of view. I only want to point these out as being objects and places of devotion, and that these particular saints of the church, have been, continue to be, acting as intercessors relative to prayer. All right, so that's the other thing I wanted to point out. One of the things that my wife and my daughters have been very patient with me over the years is I'm not only looking at those things on the wall, but those things on the ceiling and on the floor, including the intarsia or the inlaid tile. So now I'm standing, in the apse, looking back down at the back of the church or the entrance of the church, moving on, and you can see that right there. And these beautiful columns, that are white marble and black basalt that alternate in color. And if we look at the floor tile, and you can see it is right here. Sorry that we don't have as much contrast, but you'll get the idea. And if you look at the floor tile, you'll also notice that it doesn't quite match the earlier floor tile that was there. And one of the things that we find out, and one of the things that's true of every church, is this: things get added on and things get taken away. It's not always neat, which is kind of the way we are. And so consequently, when we look at this beautiful marble tile, and I would say that that marble tile is as much an act of devotion, something else placed in the church, and intarsia is no easy thing, to pull off, and particularly to create this particular geometric pattern in through there. Just as much as the frescoes that are in the apse themselves, as much as the stained glass, as much as the larger church itself. By the way, and if you have any comments or questions as I'm speaking, feel free to raise your hand. But we'll have time for Q&A after as well. One of the pleasures of being in Orvieto is I get to teach these just absolutely wonderful students from all different colleges. I had students from Gordon, from Wheaton, from Westmont, from George Fox, and they were 11 strong, and it was a sketchbook class. So every day was a new studio. So sometimes the studio was the Duomo. Sometimes the studio were the gardens in and around Orvieto. Sometimes the studio was in Rome to draw from the Caravaggios and everything else that we encountered that day in the Eternal City. And when you do a drawing, when you do a sketch, there is one thing, you're trying to kind of get it right. You're trying to figure out, you're trying to create something of a match, if you will, of what it is that you're looking at. But in doing that study can also be an act of devotion, and I want to play to that as well. So you see all these students. We're in the San Brizio Chapel. So now, if you picture, so if you're looking, you walk down the aisle. There's the apse. There's the frescoes that we're looking at. And then to the right is the San Brizio Chapel, and there are some marvelous frescoes by Fra Angelico and Luca Zingarelli. Not Zingarelli, okay, but Signorelli. I just wanted to clarify. And they're wonderful. And I'm not going to show you some of the better known, images from the San Brizio Chapel, but it was interesting that many of the students decided to focus on this image, this pietà translating from the Italian, from the Latin, compassion, in which the dead Christ is in the arms of Mary and Magdalene. And they're all kind of holding him. They're all kind of supporting him, in that way. But there is, we're probably more familiar with that Pietà by Michelangelo than this particular one. This precedes Michelangelo. Michelangelo traveled to Orvieto to study, to draw from the Signorellis. So who knows that perhaps his own Pietà may have been inspired by this one. One of the things I love about teaching the sketchbook class is I get to draw too. So I have to remember that, it's just like, okay, I can't spend all my time drawing. I have to make my way around and talk to each of my students. So, dividing that time. But I decided, that particular day that I wanted to study these angels, and these angels playing instruments. So I play the guitar, and so they're not guitars, they're lutes that the angels are playing. And so I was having a good time, drawing those particular angels in the San Brizio Chapel. There's just so much to glean. Once again, by the way, the angels are positioned, near the whole section that Signorelli painted relative to the resurrection, the resurrected figures, those that are ascending into the heavenly kingdom. And so there's all these angels in celebration and playing this music together. And one of our students there, her name's Annika, and all the students at the end of the program, like most art classes, like most classes, a final project instead of a final paper. There's a final project that they do. And Annika took her inspiration for a final project from this Zingarelli image, and again reinterpreted in a very contemporary way by using various kinds of pigments she was experimenting with, and the pigments came from various organic natural sources in and around Orvieto. So, and let me just show you this next image here. So those purples, those pinks, are from various kinds of berries that she found in Orvieto. And then she was grinding moss and soil and flowers, and so she was trying, and you'll see a sketchbook there to the right in which those experiments were going on. She also created a lino cut, a print, that she cut of a hand. And that hand became an important image that surrounded that pietà. How might we interpret those hands? These are the hands of sacrifice. These are the hands of giving. But the hands that are placed in this aura also become a kind of nimbus or light or halo that emanates from the image, so that the image of the dead Christ alludes back to the image of the resurrection in that way. The other thing that's difficult to see is that there are these other hands that she's created prints of that are supporting the figure. These other hands that allude back to the two Marys that are present in that original image. So really, really wonderful piece, isn't it? They always surprise me in what they're doing. Another student, Jane, her final project was dealing with light, but dealing with light in common spaces. In fact, these are the very spaces that the students are living in the convent. And so she was making studies, and she was using a blue ink watercolor method in doing these pieces. And she had, these are just two examples of multiple ones, and really wonderful and unusual images. If you look at the one on the right, it's once again a little difficult to see. There is a figure, actually the figure of one of her friends, and I'll point it out to you here. So there's her head, and she's looking up at the light. So she's seated over here, her legs are over here. She has a hand or an arm up over here, and the light is coming in on her. And so once again, this becomes an image of devotion to God's new day, God's light, not unlike what we saw in Caravaggio's paintings. What is the main actor over here? It's not the room or the sink, it's the light itself. So now we're going to take a little trip down south. So every time we go to Italy, so I still have family in Italy. My father was the eldest of 6 children. In 1930, he came to the United States and never looked back. And but all of his siblings stayed in Italy, and they stayed in touch mostly through letters, a periodic, very expensive phone call at the time. And in 1961, when I was 8 years old, we took a trip. This was all my mom. My mom was the one that was behind all this. You need to see your family. And so he hadn't seen his mother. His father had died the year before. He hadn't seen his mother, any of his siblings, nieces, nephews, etc. 31 years he hadn't been to Italy. So it was a huge family reunion. 1961 in the south of Italy was still kind of post-war Italy, and my little world, growing up in central New York, middle class, just exploded because I saw and experienced a very, very different way of life. And yet I also experienced incredible joy and welcome and love on the part of the family. So over the years, we've stayed in touch with the family, and we've done the same with our daughters. We've brought them over, to meet their Italian family over there. And so every time we go, we always take a trip down south and spend a week. You can't spend more than a week with the family. It's overwhelming, Family's already overwhelming. Italian families are especially overwhelming. and especially when you have to speak Italian all the time. So in the south of Italy, and so we're going down the Adriatic coast. So if you think about the heel of the boot, so north of the heel of the boot is where my father's hometown is, Bisceglie. The big city, on that eastern shore is called Bari, B-A-R-I, Bari. It's a little R roll in there, and so one evening my cousins Ornella and Ruggero and my younger cousin, their son Jacopo, they took us to Bari at night. Now I'd been to Bari before, but it was the first time we went at night, and we went to the Basilica Church of San Nicola. Now this is not Saint Nicholas, as we celebrate at Christmas time, but San Nicola is the patron saint of Bari. And there is this Romanesque church that is absolutely magnificent in the south, and the incredible, once again, we're talking more than 1,000 years ago, and a church that continues to be worshipped in, and the act of devotion relative to kind of the sculptural detail that goes on, the construction, of the church. We're talking ropes, planks, and pulleys, in order to put this. And again, a devotion that extends over hundreds of years. If you were part of the construction project, whether it was in Orvieto or whether it was in Bari, you didn't live to see the finish, and that was okay. But it was your hands, your spirit, in devotion that contributed to that cause. Just checking, make sure my time is okay. In this basilica, and this is let me just go back to the earlier picture one moment. There we go. So the portal that you're seeing right here is on the opposite side of the church. So if you're trying to match this portal with that portal, they don't match. This is another portal on the opposite side of the church that we're going in. So I wanted to clarify that. And then here we are, in the courtyard of the complex, that connects all of the buildings together. That's part of San Nicola. Downstairs, you go downstairs into the crypt of the church, which contains some of the earliest examples of the work that was done. And there's a whole set of small capitals, that are holding up that particular level of the church. Now, a capital is that very top of a column, and everyone learns in art school, that there are three kinds of capitals. There's Doric, which this all comes from the Greek, So the Doric, which is very masculine and very geometric. There is the Ionic, and the Ionic you'll know because it has the curly Q volutes on the column. And then there's the Corinthian columns that we see all over Rome, which look like flowering trees, on the top, allude back to foliage. And but these capitals are capitals that, once again, tell stories of devotion, tell stories about the church. Remember that in many of these churches, no one could actually read. If you could read, you were reading in Latin. So it was generally more the priests and scholars of the church that were. So you became familiar with the scripture through the stories that were told, through the frescoes, through the stained glass, through the carvings. And because I love sculpture and I love to make sculpture, although I'm doing a lot more drawing and painting these days, but there are, and if we look on the left, this is the same image that we're looking at. If we look at the image on the left, you'll see two different beasts. There is this beast and there is this beast. So what is this beast? It's the same one as this on this side. What is it?
Lion.
It's a lion. Very good. Now, the chances are that this sculptor or these sculptors had never seen a lion in his life. He had no idea what a lion looked like. I mean, this was just, this is like completely, out of the imagination. What does a lion look like? Now, they were familiar with oxen, and so here is the ox on this side. And so The symbol, the ox is the symbol of which gospel? Anybody? Mark. No, Mark.
Luke.
Luke is the ox. These all refer back to by the prophet Isaiah. These four images, you know. So yeah, so Luke is the ox. The lion is Mark. Very good, you know. And what about the other two gospels? Matthew.
It's
a human, right?
Person. It's either a person or an angel. You know, it's like one or the other, right? And then the other one, somebody just said it. John is the eagle. The eagle. I always think of John the eagle, the visionary. You know, that which kind of soars with wings in that way. So the four symbols. So we see two of the symbols. You know, and the other two symbols, you know, would be so the animals kind of circle around, and this artist, pretty inventive over here because he has the lion on the one side, but then he creates the lion on the other side, but the head is the same head for both lions. So if you're looking at it from one side, you see that. You look from the other side, and then you see it from the corner, and you see the two lions actually have the one head, you know, together. Just a wonderful invention, you know, in that way. You know, this is pre-Brancusi, but we can get into that another time. So in the South, you know, in Bisceglie, you know, Bisceglie is my father's hometown, you know, where the sun is always shining. It's, you know, so look at this young couple over here, you know, having a wonderful time together, you know, in Bisceglie. And this is the port cities, a whole series of small port cities north of Bari. So there's Molfetta, Bisceglie. There's Trani. Trani's probably the best known because of the large cathedral that's there that extends out, you know, onto the Adriatic, you know, and then Barletta, you know, to the north. So a whole series of small port towns. And so obviously fishing, you know, a major livelihood, major industry in the South still is, as well as agriculture. So, you know, olives, you know, almonds, you know, grapes, wine, all of the above. And all of the, you know, it's interesting, you know, the south of Italy evolved very different from the north of Italy. So it's the classic industrial north, agrarian south, sounds a little like the United States, you know, in that way. I've heard people talk about India, you know, in those kinds of terms. And so it's like, in the south of Italy, it's like, it's, you know, it's like, there's they all think we're peasants, you know, down here, but we give them all the food that they eat, you know, so it's just, so there's still a little animosity, might not be too strong a word, between the two. And so we're going to go from that basilica, you know, that goes back over 1,000 years, San Nicola, to a very recent church in Bisceglie. Now, before we move on, my family would really appreciate it if you said the name correctly. So if you look at the spell, it's not Bisceglie, you know, the way it looks. But I've got a little pronunciation up there, so we're going to have to all do this together over here. It's a little quiz, okay? So we're going to all say it together. Get ready. Here we go. Bisceglie. Bravissimo. You nailed it. Very good. So in Bisceglie, this is a, you know, 2021. I mean, it's a very current church. And it's a church that reflects the fact that this is a port city. And again, a church, you know, that creates, it's a devotion back to what does God give us? What God provides us in sun and sea, you know, our livelihood, our lives. Our place, our community, in that way. We think of the Gothic church and the Gothic arch that creates a sense of the church as a vessel. It's an inverted boat, you know, that we're all on, and we're all traveling in this vessel together as, you know, as a community. And so the architect here has taken that a step further and has created a beautiful wooden construction, that creates, it's just like, I'm sure folks at Lowell's Boat Shop up in Amesbury, where we live, would be really impressed by the construction, of these. Winslow Homer, looking at the dories, and said, would have been impressed, I think, by this construction. So this wonderful. The other thing you note is that the stained glass windows look like what? Portholes, exactly. So it's really pushing that image of the ship. And the inlaid tile, and so they're standing, so there's Catherine and my cousin Miriam and my younger cousin, her daughter Elena, standing there together. And we worshiped there on that Sunday, and this was, of course, after the worship. We happened to be there on Children's Sunday. So the priest had come down and invited, like 100 little Italian children, trying to keep them quiet while he was teaching. Good luck, good luck with that, So he had to stop periodically while he was doing his teaching, his lesson. But it was great fun. Also, so it was a time in which, there was, a liturgy very similar to the liturgy we have, but also choruses that were sung, because it was a children's service, and so there were also choruses sung that sounded very familiar, to us in that way. So once again, being able to worship, in the Duomo, like in Orvieto, but then being able to worship in this very contemporary church in Bisceglie. What a delight! What a privilege in that way. Some other things to take note of in this church. Looking at the inlaid tile, you'll see that there is this movement that kind of simulates what? That movement. Waves, water, exactly. And you'll notice there are fish, little Maranatha fish, right? That are in the water. There's also crosses, there's an area where there's a cross that moves. So the symbolism carries on. The age-old symbolism within Christianity carries on, but in a very contemporary way. Now, that is the pulpit of the church right there. It's cast in bronze, which looks like the gnarly bow of a ship, right? In that way. And kind of looks broken or split off, from the boat. And so, but nevertheless, still present. And I just, once again, just incredibly inventive in the way that was done. And once again, I'm going to keep shifting back and forth in time. This is the cathedral church, Cattedrale di San Pietro, St. Peter's Cathedral in Bisceglie. This is the oldest church and very much inspired by the Normans. So there's a Norman tower in my father's little town, not unlike the Norman towers that you see in Ireland. So we've also been able to climb up in the Norman tower during another visit when we were there. But so this strong Romanesque blocky construction, not unlike what we saw in San Nicola in Bari, and looking down and again, we're moving up the aisle, and you'll notice to the left, there's a little shrine to Mary. That's obviously not part of the original construction of that church. There's any number of different additions that go on in this church from different periods in time, including that very strange Baroque window that you see in the image on the right. That Baroque window, came much later. I mean, that came, that would have been the 1600s, when that window. And why? Well, it was a way to kind of like take the old church and give it something new, give it a little update, in that way. Give it a little image, part of our time when we're living in that way. So it's a rather unusual construction. Looking all the way, so again, we're looking up into the, and now I'm standing in the image on the right. So I'm standing right here now, looking at the entrance of the church and looking all the way back down to the exit. And right above it, you'll see a little illuminated sculptural relief, which which I'm going to show you now. There it is. So, and again, this goes back to the original construction of the church. So we have Christ in majesty. And if we notice the image of Christ, you know, he has one hand doing this, which is, what's that? He's
Blessing.
He's blessing. He's giving the blessing. And in his other hand, what is he holding? Can you tell?
A scroll?
A scroll or a book, right? You look at it, right? So he's got so we have the book that's there. You can just kind of see the binding, right? He's holding the book. What is the book?
Book of Life.
A book of life, you know. So is it's a testament. So is the book the gospel? Is the book the Bible? You know, itself. But you know, the idea is that, you know, here is what testifies to me, you know, to who I am. So that presence of Christ. Now, there are two adjacent figures. Now, the church is called San Pietro, so Saint Peter. And if we look at the image on the left, that figure is holding something over here. And this is the clue right here. He's holding something that looks like two big keys. They look like two, you know, and again, they're old-fashioned, you know, kind of keys. You remember some of you remember skeleton keys, you know. So, yeah, he's holding two keys. And so, again, the keys of the kingdom. Once again, it's an image that we see. Jesus gives the keys of the kingdom, right, metaphorically, to Peter. But they're depicted quite literally, that he's holding the keys of the kingdom. Now, there's another figure on the right that I have no idea who that figure is. I have gone up and down Google. I have searched it's really hard, first of all, to find these images. I'm showing you images that nobody shows you these images over here. So I'm going to have to, you know, contact my cousin Sergio. I'm going to say, because, you know, Sergio knows the cathedral very well. He also teaches in Bisceglie, and he would know. He got married in this church. My father served as an altar boy in this church, which is really fascinating. Yeah, so there is lots and lots of history when I walk through the streets of Bisceglie.
Maybe it's us.
Maybe yes, maybe that figure is us. Also, the way the figure kind of leans back, you know, there's this kind of wonder, you know, and maybe just overcome by the presence of. I like that, Father Dean. You know.
Could it be the sculptor putting himself there?
It's also possible. It's also possible. A lot of times, the patron, you know, if someone commissioned this particular work, the patron would be placed there. Those are all good responses, all possibilities. So. We'll see. More research to come on that one.
What's on his right chest, Jim? It looks like there's something on his right chest.
This right here?
Yes.
Yes. It's a hand. It's a hand kind of held up like this.
Okay.
And so that might be that lean back, that hand of surprise, you know? I don't know. But there's definitely this lean that the figure has. So, not sure. As for sorry, I keep darting in and out of the image over here. So. All right, let's move on. So every time we go to Italy, the family always they're so gracious, and they always want to show us, have something new that we can all, you know, that we go and do together. And we have been to the Gargano Peninsula before. So, little geography, Gargano Peninsula is a little spur in the south of Italy. Let me just point it out to you. So, Bisceglie is located right about here. This is the Gargano Peninsula. It's this spur that comes out. And so, most of the time when we think of Italy's boot, we forget about that little spur. And it's very mountainous. Limestone. It's a beautiful area to travel to in Italy. There's a lot of European tourists that will go there, you know, for the beaches. It's also the place, I don't know how many of you have heard of Padre Pio, but Padre Pio is very important. in the south of Italy. And he's even though the Catholic Church does not recognize him as a saint, he is a saint in the south of Italy. And was noted to have the stigmata, and identified with St. Francis. He always had bandages, around his hands. But Padre Pio started a hospital and a church on the Gargano Peninsula, which we've gone to visit before, and you can go see the little cell where Padre Pio, used to live in, and also he's buried in the crypt there. So we had gone there before, but the main town at the top of the Gargano is called Mount Sant'Angelo. So Monte Gargano is the name of the mountain that all of this, is on top of. And it is quite the drive, and I'm so glad my younger cousin, Antonio, was driving the car, because it's one big looping road to get up there. Elevation, 2,612 feet. And if you look at the image, probably easier to see the image on the left from driving up, and you can see this part of the bay. So we're on the Gargano Peninsula, and this is that bay, which is right inside here. So we're up. The town we're going to is Mount Sant'Angelo, and it is just a wonderful place to be. And so once you park the car, you do a lot of walking. But it's a lovely town, to walk to, and there's people that are roasting chestnuts and selling them on the side of the road, and there's all kinds of wonderful restaurants and bars. A bar in Italy is not like a bar here. A bar in Italy, it's a cafe, and so you can get all kinds of things. So always great to stop for a little shot of espresso, right? And keep the Constitution moving. So my cousin Vincenzo in the front, my cousin Antonio in the back. By the way, Antonio, red hair, red beard. So you just think of all Italians, right? Just, dark hair. No, there were Normans. There were Normans in the south of Italy, all right? So you see a lot of red hair as well, just. And the next church we went to is the sanctuary of Saint Michael the Archangel. Once again, church I had never been to. And there is a whole devotion on Mount Sant'Angelo. And so he is, of course, the patron saint is the Archangel Michael in Mount Sant'Angelo. And the church, going back to the 13th century, the oldest shrine in Western Europe dedicated to the Archangel Michael, and has been an important site of pilgrimage since the early Middle Ages. So, anyone making a pilgrimage to Jerusalem would go south, and they would go to the Gargano Peninsula. And once again, I can't even imagine a pilgrimage. Just the walk up Mount Sant'Angelo, to get to the church would have been arduous. But that's all part of the pilgrimage, isn't it? But it's not an easy thing to do or accomplish. So there's Catherine, we're all walking in, and the image of Saint Michael the Archangel, and usually he is depicted, as we will see, he usually has a sword in his hand, and usually the dragon, under his foot. Sometimes he has a spear. However, you'll see variations on this theme. And in the sanctuary, the lowest and the earliest part of the church is the grotto chapel, which has been used for worship since the 5th and 6th centuries. So the church is then built on top of the grotto church. Once again, we get these changes in these levels, of worship that has gone on over the course of many, many years. And we happened to arrive while the liturgy was going on there. So we just respectfully stayed in the back, refrained from taking pictures, and then once chapel was over, then we started clicking away. So this is all a naturally open cavern. This hasn't been carved out. So there are stalactites and stalagmites, within the cavern chapel, the grotto church, along with all kinds of images of Saint Michael. I'll show you some other images right here. Already mentioned about the pilgrimage. The Santuario Grotto di San Michele, also known as St. Michael's Cave, is dedicated to St. Michael the Archangel, who features prominently in the sacred cavern. And there is something wonderfully sacred and different about walking into a church, a cavern church that has been used for that many centuries. So this was the oldest place of worship that we had gone into. And again, a particular kind of devotion, once again, in this case, directed to St. Michael the Archangel. And these are a couple of the images that you'll see over here. So we've got the image, a much more Baroque kind of image of St. Michael on the left-hand side, who's wielding the sword and the dragon at his feet. And then the other is a spear. And it looks like St. Michael is just, okay, take that, you're dead. Just there's kind of like this little casual thing. Dragons. Usually when we think of images of dragons, we think of Game of Thrones, and dragons are enormous. They're overwhelming. But the image of the dragon in relationship to Saint Michael is kind of like an ugly little dog with wings, and why is that? And the way that the dragon is depicted, the dragon seems to almost have no power whatsoever compared to the stature of the armor-cladded, sword-wielding, Saint Michael. Well, why is that? Because good, truth is so much greater than evil. I remember something C.S. Lewis had said is that there is no opposite to God. Satan is not opposite to God. The opposite of Satan, would be Gabriel, the other one of the three archangels. So there's Gabriel, Raphael, and Michael, the three archangels. So, and yet, I would bet that the folks of Mont Saint-Angelo said, oh, but Michael is so much more, so much greater than Satan himself, than evil itself, in this way. So it is always that depiction, that God's love, God's goodness, God's power is so much greater than that of evil. Even though you see the news, and so that idea of, kind of like taking your phone and doing the doom scrolling, kind of going at just one bad piece of bad news after the next, and and it's easy to feel, that evil has just completely overpowered, goodness, but it is God who has overcome evil, and these are reminders, devotional reminders of that. This was perhaps the most unusual, and and this was just it's so wonderfully eye-opening in the church of Sanctuary Saint Michael. And there is a devotional museum, and in their museum are all kinds of objects of devotion from all different ages, folks that have come on pilgrimage and have left various kinds of sculptures and ceramic, and there's rooms filled with it. And then there's this one room that I couldn't help spending a lot of time in the devotional museum. Isn't it interesting that it's called the Devotional Museum? And it's from floor to ceiling, on all four walls. There are these images that are testimonials that people have painted. Not people that are great painters. There are no Caravaggios here, over here. These are just, if you will, common folk, like all of us, that have experienced some kind of miraculous answer to prayer through intercessory prayer through the Archangel Saint Michael. Once again, I'm not pushing any particular doctrine, over here. I'm just saying these are the images of testimony, of images. Now, if you look at this piece, first of all, you can see there's one image right there. There's another. I mean, they are just jammed against one another. So I'm kind of like doing this, kind of moving back and forth to get in on this image. What do we see? What do we see? What's going on in this painting? What's happening? What's happening on that road? A potential accident, exactly. So it's either an accident that did happen or a potential accident that happened, but a prayer that was sent up, an intercessory prayer to the Archangel Michael, who appears out of the clouds on the left-hand side, and saved this individual, from death, who is on this motor scooter. Well, some of us would say, isn't this happening every day in Italy? This kind of thing, So just get your prayers ready, So if you're driving, especially if you're on a motor scooter. But there is this, and then there's a little gratitude, that's scrawled, and I believe this one's from I think 1930. So the images range somewhere from like the 30s and into the 60s. I read. By the way, the Devotional Museum opened in 1989, but I didn't see any images that late. These are just great fun. I love these pieces. So here's a hospital room, an operation, a difficult operation. And a prayer, once again, that was sent up, so in which not only the Archangel Michael, who you'll see, so what I've done is I've just kind of enlarged the images of the floating saints, right? And so we've got the Archangel in the middle, and then on the left, we have the image of, who is the image? St. Francis, very good. The image of St. Francis over here. And on the right is Padre Pio, over here. So the patron saint, of everyone in the South in that way. And there's Giuseppe Di Matteo da Monsanto. So he's from Monsant'Angelo, and this was his operation. Usually there's something that says grazie ricevuta, that, prayers received.
Jim?
Yes, anything.
On that, what was St. Francis carrying in his left arm?
A child. Yeah.
That threw me off.
Uh-oh. Sorry about that.
We see St. Francis with animals, but almost never have I ever seen him with a child.
Yeah. It's also a child with a halo around his head. So my guess is that's what I think. Yeah. Yeah.
And I just wonder if behind St. Francis is almost Mary, or the sense of Mother of God.
Yeah.
There. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty sure it's St. Francis, but
Yeah.
so this is another one I love. So a mason, or in Italian, muratore, is the mason. Mason who's doing work on this house. There's an accident that's occurring. There is all of the concrete or mortar is falling from the wheelbarrow, and he's also falling. There's a woman with her arms up, maybe in prayer, over here. And there's a boy everyone is surprised that this has gone on. And this particular mason was saved from death through these prayers. So not only do we get that, but look in the upper right-hand corner. There's a photograph. Here I am. This is me. I'm the one who experienced this. I'm the guy that was on top of that ledge that was saved, by God through intercessory prayer to the angel. And I love the image of the Archangel Michael. Look at the dragon. The dragon is just this smoldering mass in the midst of fire. I mean, it's just completely consumed by. So not only is he stabbed by St. Michael, but now he's just reduced to ash, in that case. finish up, don't I? All right, so I'll just go. I'll conclude with this, because on some of these issues, some of these images, you'll find that there's all of this writing that's on top of the images. Those are all signatures by other people testifying that as witnesses that this really did go on. This child really was saved, from this accident in which her arm was run over by this car over here. So we have this idea of witness here. Anyway, there's more of these. I have to conclude, with the Italian family saying to all of you, grazie a tutti e pace sempre. Thank you all, and peace to all.